we call Veda as Apaurushaya, meaning those are not man written or human written. And then, of course, a question comes around that if human or men or rishis back then did not write, where did these Veds come from? And right from ancient days, you will always see dana or donation is the most important virtue. So money is not bad. Whole objective, whole purpose of human life is to attain moksha. But everybody cannot attain moksha just through meditation. Everybody cannot say, I will become sannyasi, I'll sit in a cave or sit under the tree on a mountain and just keep on meditating and attain moksha. Purusha Sukta starts with a concept. Analyze it in scientific manner. It is exactly same as Big Bang Theory. Look deep, science and spirituality is same. Okay, they are not two different things. It is just how we interpret it, how we take it forward. That differs from person to person.
Namaste, Parag ji. Thank you for taking the time.
Namaste, Deepak ji. Thank you for inviting me. Very excited to talk to you and your audience.
As are we, Parag ji, because we've seen your books as well as your other sessions. So, hoping for a very informative session. So, before we start, Parag ji, could you just give a brief introduction about yourself, your background, and your own journey?
Sure. So, I'm originally from Pune. I was born and raised in Pune in a very supportive and loving family. Since childhood, I had a lot of interest in our scriptures and our rituals and things of that nature, but in little bit untraditional way. Meaning, I've always wanted to find out why we do what we do. What is
Mm.
the reason behind it? What is the purpose behind it, and so on. And my parents were always very supportive. They they never say, oh, why are you asking such questions, right? Whatever answers they knew, they gave me. Whatever answers they did not know, they honestly told me, or directed me to some other people who might know the answer. And I also was very curious in attending different satsang kind of activities. So always curious. And eventually, I graduated, I did my masters, then I moved to US. I'm working in the IT sector right now. So from pure educational background, I have master of science and MBA. And in the technology field, I'm working as an executive. But parallelly, I'm very interested and fascinated by our scriptures. So I keep studying. Whatever I study, I understand. I try to explain it to other people to spread the knowledge.
And were you or are you associated with any particular tradition or sampradaya?
Not really. I do attend Chinmay Mission. I do participate in various activities. There is a Vitthal Mandir in our area, so uh, I work with them on various activities.
Mm.
But I won't say I'm kind of following only one stream of teaching. I listen to everything and do my own interpretations to understand what different things really mean.
Perfect. So, Paragji, on to our main topic, the Vedic Knowledge System. How would you describe it, and how is it different from any other ancient Indian knowledge system?
So when we say ancient Indian knowledge system, if you trace the roots, all those knowledge systems they trace back to Vedic knowledge system.
Hmm.
So Vedas are ancient. As you know, we call Veda as Apaurushaya, meaning those are not man written or human written. And then, of course, a question comes around that if human or men or rishis back then did not write, where did these Veds come from?
Hmm.
So our belief is these Veds exist in the nature, and these rishis had acquired special abilities to listen to those uh, mantras, those Vedas that are available in the environment, and they whatever they heard, they just reproduced or they just taught to their disciples. So for this reason, these rishis did not take any credit. They never said it is my creation, it is
Hmm.
my writing. They did not author it. They said I'm just a channel, I'm just a medium through which this knowledge is revealed. Right. So that is why Veda are Apaurishaya. Also, it is believed that these Veda, these rishis heard, and since it is heard, it is also called as Shruti. So our knowledge system has two primary divisions or segments. One is Shruti one is Smriti. Most of the later knowledge traditions that different rishis wrote, they elaborated, they taught to their disciples. They had their own interpretations, opinions, ways of teaching. All those are called Smriti Grantha or Smriti Jnana. And whatever comes purely from Veda, it is called Shruti. So
Mhm.
at a high level, it is Shruti and Smriti. And of course, within Shruti and Smriti, there are a lot of divisions, and we will see that as we move forward.
I think let's start from that angle itself. If we start from Shrutis, how does it flow down, and what are the core texts in each segment?
So if you look at Shruti, for example, then Shruti Granthas primarily are Veda.
Mhm.
And as we know, there are four Veda: Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. And of course, Yajur Veda has two branches, Krishna and Shukla. Now, when we talk about Veda, many people think Veda is just one book or one document or one scripture. So that is not the case. Whatever mantras that rishis heard in the nature, that core piece of Veda is called Sanhita. So Sanhita is what they really heard in the atmosphere or through their special abilities. Then there are further portions of each Veda that is called Brahman Grantha, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. We most of us have heard Upanishad word. So Veda starts with Sanhita, which is the collection of mantras that rishis heard. Then they did some further elaboration, mostly from ritualistic perspective, which is Brahman Grantha. Then, as they matured, they did some contemplation, and for contemplation and self study and internalization, they preferred to go away from the society so they can sit, concentrate, focus, study. So, all those studies and those kind of information that came out of that contemplation and self study, that is called Aranyaka, because those were kind of constructed when these rishis went to Aranya or forest. So they are called Aranyaka. And the last portion is also called as Vedanta or Upanishada. So Upanishad is typically, in most cases, it is a dialogue between a teacher and a student, or a guru and shishya. And the Vedic knowledge is explained to shishya by the rishi or by the guru for in different Upanishads. So the Upanishad is more of a dialogue. Of course, that is not true for every single Upanishad, but that's the typical structure of Upanishad. So if you look at Shruti, Shruti has Veda, Veda has Sanhita, Brahman, Aranyak, and Upanishad. That is the construct of Shruti Grantha. Then if we look at Smriti Grantha, again there are different streams of thought, different opinions, but in general, Smriti Grantha has two parts. One is Itihasa and one is Purana. Itihasa, we translate it loosely as history, but it's not exactly the greatest translation. Itihasa means this is exactly what happened, or this is exactly how it happened. Okay, and under Itihasa there are two grantha. One is Ramayana, that is Valmiki Ramayana, and Mahabharat, which is written by Maharshi Vyas. So those two grantha, those two texts fall under Itihasa grantha. And under Purana, there are so many Puranas. Plus there are Dharma Shastra, there are Sutras, and there are Vedanga and Upaved. Upaveds are sub Vedas, which are extracted knowledge for specific context or with specific aspect. If you look at example of Upaveda, then Sthapatya Shastra is a Upaveda, Sthapatya Veda. So that all the architectural aspects, construction, architecture, town planning, city planning, those kind of aspects, as an example, are collected from different Vedas, and that one text focuses on architectural aspects is called Sthapatya Veda. Similarly, there is Dhanurveda, Ayurveda, and so on. So those are Upavedas. Some people believe that Vedanga and Upaveda are part of Shruti or part of Veda itself. But most common belief is those are Smriti Grantha. So at a high level, that is the
Mm.
explanation of how Shruti and Smriti knowledge systems are divided.
A couple of questions. So let's start with the Shruti Granthas, and as you gave the definition, is it almost consistently that the Upanishads come towards the end of Vedas?
Correct, correct. And that is why Upanishad is also called Vedanta, right?
Mhm.
It's end of Vedic knowledge flow. And end does not mean the knowledge stops there, but the building of the text, building
Mhm.
of the scripture or the script, it stops there.
Okay.
So you have Sanhita, then some commentary based on certain ritualistic aspects is Brahman Grantha, contemplation is Aranyak, and then after that it is more of teaching that knowledge, or sharing that knowledge, or
Mm.
answering questions. So that kind of interaction between student and teacher, that is the last part, which is Vedanta or Upanishad.
The categorization is often called that Upanishads are the Jnana Kanda and everything else in Veda is the Karam Kanda. Is the distinction very specific there, or it's an intermixing?
Again, there are different thought processes, different streams of thoughts. I cannot distinguish Veda as only Karma Kanda, because even if you say Upanishad is elaboration of Veda itself. So the knowledge portion of it, without mixing too much of ritualistic aspects or karma kanda, is elaborated in Upanishad. So yeah, Upanishad is purely jnana kanda, but that does not mean Veda is only karma kanda.
Mm.
The Veda also has knowledge, a whole variety of knowledge, but it also has ritualistic aspects.
Right. And you mentioned that, I mean, at least in schools, Itihasa is translated as history, which you said is not a great translation. What would be a good translation in that case?
Oh, that's a good question. Uh, I don't know. Maybe how it happened or
Mm.
what happened, something like that. There may not be a fit of one single word. It might be more of a descriptive context.
Okay. And as we talk of Shrutis and Smritis, the core objective of this knowledge system, is it consistently between the four purusharths, and even then we have the moksha pradhan objective in most of them, or would you categorize them as having at least some variety in objectives?
That's a very good question. So, as you know, in our Shastra, in our tradition, we believe in four Purusharthas: Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Right? So, Dharma is your day to day activities done as per your Varna and Ashram. So dharma is defined by varna and ashram combination. Right?
Mhm.
As a student, what you're supposed to do. As a householder, what you're supposed to do. If you are following certain profession, then depending on different phases of life, you have different duties and responsibilities.
Mm.
That is dharma. Now, dharma is the foundation. Anything that we do has to be built on foundation of dharma. It is righteousness, doing right things. Then, obviously, for our survival, we need money. So that comes into artha. So we have to make money. Making money is not bad. Money itself is not bad. It is common misinterpretation that money is bad. No, money is not bad. There is no such mention. I mean, right from ancient days, you will always see dana or donation is the most important virtue. So money is not bad. Just chasing the money and following wrong path to make money is obviously bad. So the second is dharma, artha, then kama. So kama is all the desires. And as a human, as a common human, we cannot say I have no desires, I will not live for any desires, I don't want anything. That happens with sadhus and sannyasis. They can do it, but most common people cannot do it. And our shastra understands that, and they are not forcing you should not have any desires. I mean, if you leave away all the karma, there will be no progeny, right? The human race will not exist. And different inventions, different aspects, different objects, they won't come into existence, right? So it's not that it is bad. How you use it, what you do with it, defines if it is good or bad. So that is Kama, and last is moksha. In our scriptures, the belief is the purpose of human life is to attain moksha, and we believe that only through human life we can attain moksha. So we go through different birth cycles, different species, and finally we become humans because we have ability to discriminate. We have ability to decide what is good and what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. So through those abilities, we consistently will do good things and eventually wash out all the potential bad deeds, bad things we have done in this life or previous lives, and become totally pure and attain moksha. So that is the whole context
mm,
of dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Now the knowledge system has both the aspects. It has practical aspects as well as uh, what you call spiritual aspects. So even as I mentioned, there is a Sthapatya Ved. Now Sthapatya Ved itself talks about how to build a building, how to plan the city, how to do the irrigation system, so on and so forth. Now all these things are not directly related to moksha, but that is your artha portion probably. That is your day-to-day survival portion to make money and make a living out of it. Maybe there are some desires associated with that. As long as those are on the foundation of dharma, you can still attain moksha. Whole objective, whole purpose of human life is to attain moksha. But everybody cannot attain moksha just through meditation,
mm,
right? Everybody cannot say, I will become sannyasi, I'll sit in a cave or sit under the tree on a mountain and just keep on meditating and attain moksha, right? That will not
mm.
work for the society. So you live your life righteously, rightfully, properly, without harming anybody, and so on, and then you will attain moksha.
And in this chart of Shruti, Smriti, Itihasa, Purana, is there further segmentation as we come down?
I mean, then, as I said, then there are different smritis, like Manu Smriti is there, Yajnavalkya Smriti is there, so on and so forth. So there are multiple books.
Hmm.
Those are categorized under those categories. So
And
only
is
Itihasa has only two books, but Purana, there are so many Puranas, right? It's not just one Purana. Of course, Vedanga and Upaveda, there is also fixed number of books. But for others, there are so many Smriti Granthas. Parashar Smriti is there, right? So there are a lot of Smritis, lot of Purana Granthas.
mm. And something you mentioned about it, you said not everybody can do meditation and or right become a brahmachari, but on this everybody aspect, there is often a thinking that who was allowed to study Vedas. How would you view that?
Very good question and a very important question in today's context. So there is a common belief or rather misunderstanding that only men and Brahmins are allowed to study Ved. Other Varna are not allowed to study Veda. Women are not allowed to study Veda. That is a huge misunderstanding.
Hmm,
And it's absolutely wrong. The reason it is wrong is twofold. One is uh, if you look at the construct of Veda, I mentioned, right, there are rishis who saw or who heard these Veda or mantra in the environment and they reproduced it in a verbal fashion. Many of those rishis are women. They are called rishikas. So, if the knowledge is revealed through women, how can I say that they are not allowed to study the same knowledge?
hmm,
Right? So, it is absolute misunderstanding and absolute incorrect. Same way, different rishis came from different varna. There are rishis who were Brahmins, there are rishis who were Shudra. So, there was no authority that only certain varna or certain gender can do certain things. That is absolutely wrong, and that was maybe uh, constructed over years of history. uh, Brahmins did continue to focus on study, so they gained more and more authority, and others focused on respective part of the karma, and they focused less and less on study of Veda. So it eventually become only men or Brahmins are allowed to study Veda. One important aspect, though, very relevant in again current social context. Our belief is every verse in Vedic literature is called mantra. Mantra is manana trayate, iti mantra. So when we chant a mantra, there are certain vibrations that are created in our body as well as in the atmosphere, which has different effects. Now, certain vibrations may not be good for women in certain part of the month. So, in that context, yes, there are certain restrictions that women should not chant, not study. Women should not chant certain mantras because they might have adverse effect on their body. But that does not mean they are not allowed to study or they are not allowed to chant. It is recommended that certain parts women should not chant. So we should take it in the context, not generalize it that women are not allowed to study.
Hmm. And while we're on this topic of various misconceptions that have arisen over the years, another topic often comes up is animal sacrifices. How do you view that particular subject?
Okay. Again, a very good question. So there are two things. One is pure Shastra or pure what is prescribed in Veda as a karma kanda, right? And what are the traditions? Tradition is something that evolves over years, hundreds and thousands of years. And how traditions evolve, I'll give you one example. But if you look at pure ritualistic aspects in Vedic literature, I don't think, again, I don't claim to know every single Ved in every single aspect of every single Ved, but I don't see any mention or anywhere Veda promoting animal sacrifice. I'll give you a very important example. The first reference of, so to say, Pashubali comes in Rigveda or Purusha Sukta, which is in all the four Vedas. Okay, but there is a mention saying Abadhan Purusham Pashum. This whole sukta is a sequential description of evolution or creation of universe. So first this happened, then it happened, then it happened, then it happened, so on and so forth. So in that journey, when it mentions this verse, Abadnan Purusham Pashum, the life is not created on the earth yet.
Hmm.
The life comes in the next verses. So if the life is not created, how can I sacrifice something? Right? So the context there is totally different. Many times people do not study right verses in right context, right sequence. Different Sanskrit words have multiple meanings.
Hmm.
Literally, there are words that have more than 100 different meanings. Right? So we have to get the right meaning in the right context if we want to understand that portion of the scripture or mantra or something. So it is talking about this Atma, Paramatma, whatever you can say. Set itself free, potentially to be born in the bodies of different living species.
Hmm.
And then it entered into different species and so on and so forth. So that Abadnan Purusham Pashum has nothing to do with somebody sacrificing an animal or Pashu as an animal. The Pashu as an animal did not exist. Pashu itself is uh, another name or another description of Atman itself. So we misinterpret a lot of things, and then we start following certain
Hmm.
methods or literal translations without understanding, and we keep making different claims, so which is very incorrect, I would say.
So we'll come to the point of how to study and what are the current avenues of studying Vedas and Upanishads. But prior to that, since you mentioned evolution, creation, Purusha Suktam, would you like to give a brief summary of how Vedas treat creation, and also since you are working in technology and also in the States, how do you align it with the current scientific understanding?
Okay, that's again a very good question. So there are different suktas or different sections of Veda that talk about whole creation aspect. Purusha Sukta is the most important one because it appears in all four Veda. It is recited in many rituals. So a lot of Shodashopachara puja that we perform, those are based on, or they follow, those pujas follow Purusha Sukta. So there is Purusha Sukta, there is Nasadiya Sukta, there is Narayana Sukta, and there are a couple of more, I was told, which describes creation of the universe. So the Purusha Sukta starts with a concept. If you analyze it in scientific manner, it is exactly same as Big Bang theory. So it says how the whole evolution, or how the whole universe started through a Big Bang, then how the galaxies were formed, then after the galaxies how the earth was formed. On the earth, first there was water, then the land was formed, then trees came. Before that, the mechanism for rain was established, then the trees came, then the rest of the animal species came. So that whole description in very sequential and structured manner is given. The other thing, slightly out of context of your question, but very relevant to this discussion, in Purusha Sukta, there is also a mention of four Varnas, and the mantra says, Brahmanosya Mukhamaseta Bahu Rajanya Kritaha Uru Tadasya Yad Vaishyah Padbhagam Shudro Ajayata. Now, many people think that so the caste system itself is described in Veda, which is again wrong. This has nothing to do with caste system, because the human society is still not formed. How can you talk about casteism before human society is formed? The second blame is, it says Padbhagam Shudro Ajayata. That means Shudras are born from feet. That means they are inferior. Again, that interpretation itself is wrong. But even if it is right, who says feet are inferior? When we prostrate to somebody, we touch their feet. Feet are important. Without feet, you cannot stand, you cannot walk around, you cannot do most of your day-to-day functions. So it has nothing to do with hierarchy, first of all. And you will see so many description in other granthas, even in Mahabharata, it clearly says that there is no distinction or hierarchy between four varna. It was later on misinterpreted and used for selfish benefits by different people or different societies. But in the context of Veda, it is just talking about different aspects of human life. Brahmin is an aspect. Okay, Kshatriya is an aspect. So Brahmin is an aspect where everybody is uh, has ability of acquiring knowledge. Kshatriya is an aspect which is present in everybody of us, which helps us defend ourselves, protect ourselves, right? Vaishya is a aspect within ourselves which helps us store food or store certain things, right? In common word, it is storing the wealth, but in general, storing anything. And Shudra is another aspect of our life which helps us perform all the day-to-day functions. So these are four aspects, four attributes. Those are not hierarchical classifications of different people.
There's something you mentioned of interpretation, right? Which obviously has a huge significance when it comes to religious texts, and even in something, right? Even if you talk of Vedanta, right, you'll see multiple different branches: Advaita, Vishishadvaita, Advaita. Right? You'll see different branches there. So, how do you personally see this point of interpretation? Because the words are there, they could mean very different things. So, in your learning, in your teaching, or in your understanding, how do you look at interpreting it in the right manner?
So Dipakji, for different sections of Veda, different sukta, it is written what that sukta describes, right? So again, I'll take example of Purusha Sukta. It clearly says that it describes creation of the universe. Now, I, I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm not saying I'm superior or more expert than anybody. But there are so many swamis, so many books, so many YouTube lectures that talk about Purusha Sukta. But their interpretation, their description, their explanation is purely uh, dharmic.
Mm.
Okay, they devotional, which is important aspect. I'm not at all denying that, but there is very minimal effort made to interpret Purusha Sukta in the context of creation of universe. That is the very context, and you will see lot of YouTube lectures. They say that this Sukta describes creation of the universe, but when they go further in their explanation or in the lecture, they don't talk about creation aspect at all.
Hmm.
it's more about praising the god or praising certain things or just explaining certain things in uh, dharmic way or ritualistic way or spiritual way. And then over the years it happened, and eventually the scientific aspects kind of started falling apart. There are a lot of great people. You might have heard of Dr. PV Vartak from Pune. He recently passed away. He was a practicing surgeon, but he has written so many books about different practical aspects, scientific aspects of different scriptures, not just Veda, but different sections. Same I see today, Nilesh Okji, you might have heard his name. You might have heard Raj Vedamji. So all these people are looking into our scriptures, our history, to find certain practical, technical, scientific aspects, and not just ritualistic and spiritual aspects.
Mm. And how do you personally see the intermixing or alignment between science and spirituality?
If you really look deep, science and spirituality is same.
Mm.
Okay, they are not two different things. It is just how we interpret it, how we perceive it, how we take it forward. That differs from person to person. And other thing is, every verse is probably meant to be interpreted in different ways. You can't take different aspects of knowledge out of same verse or same hymn or same sukta. I heard, I did not get a chance to study in details, but I heard somebody studied Purusha Sukta and built a battery
Mm.
based on what is described in Purusha Sukta. So again, the knowledge is there. Same knowledge you can interpret in different ways, look at it in different ways, and apply it in different ways. But my only urge is, don't look at it only in the religious or spiritual way. Look at it from practical way and try to understand what it is. And there is beautiful knowledge available. It will be, wow moment or aha moment when you interpret something which gives you such a common or such a fantastic scientific interpretation.
A quick academic question on what we discussed earlier on the Vedic knowledge system. Where do, let's say, texts such as Tantra, right, Tantric texts, where do they fit into this paradigm?
So tantric texts again, they come as a part of Smriti. Lot of tantric texts are based on Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda has a lot of aspects of, you know, for lack of better words, something like black magic or those kind of things. So it is, the roots probably go back to Atharva Veda, but there are different tantric scripts, and again, some of those are really built based on certain Vedic contexts. Some people have just randomly built something, right, on their own, and it's very difficult to distinguish or clearly point out this is authentic, this is not authentic, and people get offended if you if you say anything.
Hmm. So at this point, is it a parallel knowledge system which is evolving on its own?
I won't say parallel, it is a different application of knowledge system. So it is the same knowledge. For example, as I said, Atharva Ved has different aspects, that if you do such and such thing, you can take all the powers away of your enemy. If you do
Hmm.
such and such things, you can attract another person. If you do such and such thing, you can attract wealth. So those kind of references are there, and then people must have built on top of it.
And another thing which you mentioned in the beginning was two branches of Yajur Veda.
Mhm.
Could you just spend a few more minutes on that?
Yeah. So Maharshi Veda Vyas, he constructed the Vedic knowledge into four Vedas, and then to make sure that knowledge sustains and survives, he assigned four different disciples to take lead on those different sections or those four Veda. He assigned Yajurved to sage Vaishampayan, and Vaishampayan had one of his favorite disciples, a student called Yajnavalkya. Now, over the years, there was some dispute between Yajnavalkya and uh, his teacher, Vaishampayan, and it became extreme. It went to extreme. They had a big fight, and Vaishampayan said, "Okay, whatever I have taught you, just vomit it out." You don't have my knowledge anymore. Now, at that point, there are certain different interpretations. So, Yajnavalkya vomited it out. Now, vomited out does not literally mean he threw up in material form, but again, people take a literal translation and interpret it. And then they said that there were birds called titari, and those titiri birds ate that whatever was thrown by Yajnavalkya, and they became wise, and they started following that knowledge system, which is not really the case. When he said, throw up your knowledge, that means, okay, I have given you knowledge, give it back to me, and you forget it. Now, give it back to me, meaning he had few more disciples. He said, okay, I taught you, you teach them now, give that knowledge back to them. And one of the sages was Rishi Tittari, who gained that knowledge back from Yajnavalkya. Now, Yajnavalkya went and did Upasana again to regain that knowledge in purest form. And Suryadev himself came in the form of a Ashwa or a horse and gave that knowledge to Yajnavalkya. So now that there was one stream which Yajnavalkya gained through sun god, and the other stream which he had gotten from Vaishampayan and gave it back to Titari. So now those became two different branches of Yajurveda. So the form that he got from sun god, it became Shukla Yajurveda, the purest form, and the form that he taught back to Titri became Krishna Yajurveda. Now again, Krishna doesn't literally it means black, but it really doesn't mean that was inferior or anything. But the context probably is, if I teach you something, I will teach in certain way. If you teach it to somebody else, you will teach in your own fashion, in your own words, and you might change the sequence knowingly, unknowingly. You might change the words, obviously. You might change the way you explain versus how I explained. So there were certain variations in what Yajnavalkya taught to Titari. That is why it was called Krishna or Krishna Yajurved. And then what he regained from Lord Surya, that was Shukla Yajurved. That is why only in Yajurved you will see two branches, Shukla and Krishna.
Right. And also, there is another classification of Vedas as Vedatrayi.
So, Vedatrayi means three Veda, whereas we know that there are four Veda. So, what is this? Is this a contradiction? What is the conflict? So, initially there were three Vedas: Rigveda, Yajurveda, and Samaveda. The Atharva Veda came to existence much later. Also, as I mentioned, it had a lot of aspects which are more common people oriented, like doing some black magic or doing certain things for very specific personal gain. All the ritualistic aspects in Veda are for benefit of entire society or cultivating nature and uh, praising to different powers in the nature and so on, whereas Atharva Veda has certain aspects which are for personal benefit, short term benefits. So a lot of sages that time did not accept Atharva Veda as part of Vedic knowledge system, but eventually, because of the all the other aspects that it has, the knowledge that it has, it eventually got acceptance. So before that it was called Vedatrayi, and then later on it became all four Vedas, as including Atharva Veda.
Coming back to the actual study of Vedas, at least in India in today's time, how is that being imparted? Are there still distinct gurukuls who are focusing on one particular Veda? Or how does, because obviously there are certain gurukuls where students are going right from childhood and they are continuing that branch. So there are two questions in this. One is, how's it currently being imparted to students? And second, is the distinction between people who do the usual education system, in which I think I'm assuming you and me have been through, and people who are in gurukuls, and there is no intermixing between these two branches. Is something happening in which at least there is some sort of alignment or symbiosis between these two different streams?
Yes. So the first part of the question is, many gurukulas, and I cannot authoritatively say every gurukula, but many gurukuls, they follow certain tradition or certain Vedas. So there is gurukul for Rigveda, there is gurukul for Yajurveda, Samaveda, so on and so forth. Right. So they follow specific tradition, and the purpose there is very important. They want to maintain the purity and authenticity of that Veda. So they teach that Veda only, in purest form. Of course, the way they pronounce, the way you chant, the way you perform different ritualistic aspects is very, very important. And they just focus on one particular stream, one particular Veda, and make their students expert in that branch. Now, the second part of the question is people like you and me who are into formal education system, how and versus the Gurukul system, is there any commingling of that?
Mm,
Uh, to my knowledge, there is no commingling, but at the same time, there are a lot of institutions that are making an attempt to mix these two, and obviously that needs to mature a lot. But there are educational, I mean, either some normal universities, more than normal regular universities, or some private institutions that are running some courses about Vedic knowledge or certain aspects of Vedic knowledge, and trying to relate it back to mainstream education, the formal education. But honestly, there is a lot of effort required in that context. Of course, if you take very specialized branch like Ayurveda,
mm.
then the medicine branch, yes, there is a proper formal education based on Ayurveda, which again relates back to the Vedic knowledge. But there are only a couple of them like that, but there are a whole lot that can be built in similar fashion.
Prakshi, this has been a very informative session. But before we end, because you started on this path in a young age and now you're continuing with writing books, what impact has this study been on your own life and in your, let's say, in your professional life, in your personal life? And why should somebody devote their time into studying these scriptures?
I won't say everybody needs to study the scriptures. Of course, it depends on everybody's interest.
Mm,
But as a Sanatani, as a Hindu, if somebody asks us some basic questions, we should be able to answer. And not to defend ourselves, but just to know. Like, we all know who we are. We know where we live. We know who our parents are, probably grandparents are. In similar fashion, and we take pride in that, right? We take, my father is such and such person. He was in this profession, his accomplishments, so on. We take the pride in institutions we work for. I work for such and such company. It is such a big company. It's a multinational company. Whatever. We take pride in that. In same way, we should take pride in our own heritage, in our uh, ancestors and our knowledge system. For that, we need to understand basics. We don't need to know everything. I don't think anybody can claim to know everything,
mm,
but we need to take some basic interest to understand some fundamental concepts, and that is the whole thing. And again, I just wrote this book. It will be available on Saturday. I don't know if you can see it, little bit defocused. But
yeah.
anyway, it will be available on Amazon. I'm launching it on Dashera Day. So that can be another mechanism to gain the knowledge about this Vedic knowledge system and the construct of that knowledge system and so on.
Mm,
But there are so many avenues. You can just do a Google search and avenues will open up. And interestingly, once you start studying, you will keep getting different clues. So when I
mm,
was studying, especially writing a book on Purusha Sukta, I started somewhere, that one thing led me to other, that led me to other, that led me to other. And it is just fascinating how many links, how many books, how many lectures you can get hold of. It is just little bit initiative we have to take from our side.
mm. Curiosity always remains the key in any endeavor, and especially in learning something new. Perfect, Paragji. Thanks a lot for taking the time and explaining us this knowledge system. It's been a very informative session. Thank you again for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Deepakji, and thanks for
Thank you.
this initiative of this podcast through which you are spreading knowledge. It's a very divine initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much.